Good evening, students. One minute, I'll just open the BOS Q&A system. Sir, this link for the Q&A that is not working. Just have a look at that.
Hello, sir. Any issue?
Yes. The BOS link is not working.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So good that very nice, very good evening, Ms. Soumya, Ms. Vishaka, Dhanalakshmi, Simran. Good to see you. So today, I think I'll share the screen. Show it here again. We'll be discussing on the topics post input tax credit. In the last session, we had discussed on input tax credit very detailedly, correct? So today we'll discuss after you have made your sales, right, which is very important topics, what happens next. So that is what is we are today's discussion. The discussion on registration, tax invoice, the credit note, a debit note, then e-way bill and e-invoicing. So these are the topics which we will discuss today. Okay. So, but before that, on input tax credit, which was a very important topic, I'm sure after our discussion, you would have gone through at least, or something would have gone into your heads like, okay, this is so many things which has to be looked into. At least a thought would have gone into, right? So, from that perspective, let us clear those doubts if you have anything on input tax credit. Like I always state that input tax credit is a very important topic. So, if you have any kind of doubts or any kind of unresolved questions in your thoughts, please tell that first so we can clear input tax credit questions, get clarified on that, then we can move to the present topic on registration. Just give a couple of minutes for anyone to ask any questions on input tax credit. Then we can go on to the present today's topic. Okay. So if there are no questions, I assume that you are all aware and you're completely thorough on the topic of input tax credit. With that assumption, I will proceed because otherwise, then I can't think anything else because there's no response. So, good that if you have understood the input tax credit, because that input tax credit will touch all the chapters, and the number of marks also, which will you can think that the allocation for the marks on input tax credit will be substantially high than the other topics. So please go through the input tax credit topic, and then we can take it up in a question and session whenever you are ready. So today we'll discuss on the procedural aspects. We'll start with registration, and then we'll discuss on the tax invoice. What are the invoice? What are the documents to be mentioned? Those are very kind of a theoretical topic. So we'll concentrate on those topics which you have to focus upon. Okay. So when we discuss on registration under GST, who has to take registration? Any person who's making a supply has to take registration, correct? But then who will have to make the supply? Like a small dealer who is doing a supply, should he take registration? And when should he take the registration? So to give that clarity, the law has to provide the timeline when they should take a registration. That is the reason we have this topic in hand. Firstly, the question is why registration is required? Without registration, can't I run the GST? Can't I pay the taxes? I will pay the taxes and I'll just close it off. The question for you is, even though this is an introductory topic, I will pose this question to you to understand your thoughts. Why do you think registration is required? Any thoughts? Need not be correct. We'll just get to know whether what we have to do. To be able to collect GST and get credit, to avail credit, to get benefit from GST for identification of taxpayers, government can have the record of suppliers taking input tax credit, charge GST on the invoices. Perfect. So that gives that, yes, you know the basics of registration. You have all answered what I will say in this slide. It is a fundamental requirement for identification of taxpayer, because who is a taxpayer we will not know. Once he registers, then his details are available with the government. So we can identify him that he is a person and he's a taxpayer. Okay. Second is, it's a first step towards GST compliance. To become compliant, you will have to register. So that is when your compliance starts, right? You will file the returns and other things. That also is a compliance. But the first step before doing all of that is you have to register. That also is a one step towards a good compliance approach. Then you will be legally recognized as a person, as a supplier, which means that you will then have the right to collect the taxes. Once you're legally registered, legally recognized as a person, as a supplier, then you have a right to collect taxes. And then you can also claim your input tax credit. As we had seen in the previous session, that if you have taken so many purchases, but you have not registered, then you cannot claim the credit. So in order to claim the credit, you have to register. Now, you all answered this. So does it mean that, can I say that a person who is not registered is not liable to pay tax? Can I make a statement like this, that I've made sales, but I'm not registered, so I'm not liable to pay tax at all? Okay. Few students are saying yes. Few students are saying no, you are still liable to pay tax. So the question is, does it mean that a person who is not registered, he is not liable to pay tax? The answer for this is twofold. He is still liable to pay tax. Okay. He is still liable. Just because he's not registered, he cannot show away or just escape from the liability of payment of taxes. He's still liable to pay the tax, but he's not entitled to collect the tax. To pay the taxes, he will have to pay from his pocket. If he misses to register, his liability to pay is still there, but his right to collect taxes goes away. Why? Because we have seen here that once he's registered, then he has a right to collect the taxes. But if he is not registered, he will not be entitled to collect the taxes because the charging section says that there shall be levied a tax called the CGST and shall be paid by the taxable person. So everything is interlinked. So section 9 of the levy section says that that's the levy or the charging section says that a person who has made any supply is liable to pay tax. But if he's registered, then he gets a benefit of collecting the tax from the customer. But if he's not registered and he's made sales, okay, if he's not registered, still he is liable to pay tax because an unregistered person also can be asked to pay tax because he's made a supply. So registration doesn't give you a non-registration doesn't give you a kind of a immunity saying that you don't have to pay tax. You still have to pay tax. So to pay that tax, you will have to register it. Fine. So non-registration doesn't give that escape route, is what I'm trying to say. So even if not registered, we pay to the supplier and he further pays to the government. Thus, GST is an indirect tax where person generally pays it through supplier and not directly. That's correct. But my question here is not from the person, not from the angle of the person whom we are paying, not from us who is the ultimate customer. The question here is from the perspective of the supplier. A supplier has say made sales of 50 lakh rupees and he's not registered. The liability on him is still there, right? Because if he is not registered, he does not have a right to collect the taxes from the customer. But his liability to pay to the government is still there. So he will pay to the government from his own pocket. Okay. Understood the implication of registration then? So if he's not registered, he will pay from his pocket. If he's registered, he will actually get an additional right to collect the taxes from the customer. Okay. A consultant with a turnover of 50 lakhs is not registered. Exactly my question. A turnover consultant, he's having a turnover of 50 lakhs and he's not registered. So what will he do? He will registration ensure seamless flow of credit. So therefore, he will take the registration and pay the taxes. Now, important conditions for registration is there is no centralized registration. Okay. You cannot, if you have 10 branches across different states, can you tell the government, I will take just one registration? Will they accept that? No, yes. Again, two conflicting views. If you have 10 branches, you can't take one registration because in each state, you have to take separate registration. Like if you have 10 branches in one state, then you can have one registration. But my question was, you have 10 branches in different states, then you cannot take one registration. If you have multiple state branches, then you have to take separate registrations in each of those states. Okay. So registration is for each state. So you cannot take centralized registration. That is the first aspect to consider while taking any registration. Registration in every state from where he makes a taxable supply. So from where he makes a taxable supply, there he will have to register and not to the in the place where the customers are located. He can supply from any state. If he is supplying to another state, he is not required to go to that state and register because he does not have any kind of presence there. His customers are there, so he will charge IGST to that location, but he will not take registration in that state. Okay. Now, if the taxable turnover in Karnataka is 10 lakhs and the taxable turnover in Maharashtra is 30 lakhs. So, will he take registration in Karnataka? Will he take registration in Maharashtra? Those are the questions which comes up. So, we will have to see whether he is doing taxable supply because the point here, what I'm trying to drive here is registration in every state from where he makes a taxable supply. Okay, understood this? So from this, if you have understood, just tell me when I say he makes a taxable supply and in this scenario, right? Tell me he will have to take registration in Karnataka or registration in Maharashtra or registration in both the places or fourth option, registration not required in both the states. Because for registration, we will have to see the threshold and threshold we will have to see price of aggregate turnover. Now aggregate turnover is 40 lakhs in this case. Soumya and Dhanlakshmi are of the view that he will have to take registration only in Karnataka. But in Karnataka, my turnover is only 10 lakhs. And Amar is saying that registration in both the states. Aggregate should take for both the state, but registration in only Karnataka. Good. Okay. So it means that you are clear on it. Perfect. So he is making a taxable turnover in Karnataka and exempt turnover in Maharashtra. So registration will be required only in the state where he makes a taxable supply. And for taking registration in Karnataka, we will see the aggregate turnover. Aggregate turnover will mean the exempt turnover and taxable turnover all put together. So then the aggregate turnover is 40 lakhs. So he will take registration in Karnataka, even if it is 10 lakhs, because his aggregate turnover is touching 40 lakh rupees. Right. So he will take registration in Karnataka because on the 10 lakhs, he's making taxable supply. But in Maharashtra, registration will not be required because he's not making any taxable supply in Maharashtra. Okay? Which would imply that no registration is required in a state if he is not making any taxable supply in that state. Now, if you have multiple branches in a state, as we have discussed, you can take single registration. And in that registration, will you mention only one place or you will mention all the places? You will mention only one place called as principal place of business, which is called as PPOB. And all other places, you will call it them as additional place of business. Okay. So one will be principal place of business and all others will be additional place of business. And if a person is having multiple place of business in a state, then he may be granted separate registration for each place of business. Okay. If a person is having multiple places of business, then he may be granted separate registration. It is not a compulsion that all branches in one state has to take one registration. They can take separate registration also. But again, the point to be noted here is if a person is having multiple place of business in a state, he may be granted separate registration for each place of business in a state. Okay. So from that perspective, see a scenario where business one is IT software services, business two is employee training services. So there are two businesses and the location of this is in a common office. And we'll go to scenario two. But for scenario one, tell me whether separate registration is possible or no. And against a second example, he's having one business hotel, second business also is in a hotel, but they are in a separate location within the state. Okay. Understand the difference here. In second uh, example, he is having a similar business but in separate places. But in scenario one, he's having different businesses but in one place. APOB means additional place of business. Different are in same state. They're in same state. Same state. Different kinds of different tax will be there. Doesn't matter. So when a one person also is there, he can be dealing with multiple rates of goods, like 5%, 12%, 18%. He can deal with multiple rates of goods. So that is not the criteria, Gayatri. So Amar is saying in first case, one registration is sufficient. Okay. So one registration is sufficient, but if supplier need for multiple, he can go for multiple. So that's what I'm asking. In this scenario, can he go for multiple registration? You can apply. Okay. You can apply, but my answer would be different. Separate registration is not possible since the business are operating from a common location because here the location is common and the pointer says that if a person is having multiple place of business in a state, he may be granted separate registration for each place of business. So for each place of business, there'll be one registration and these two is operating from a common office. So separate registration will not be possible. But in second scenario, he's operating one business, same business itself, but they are in a different locations. So there he will get separate registration. Clear? So when you read in between the lines and understand the lines in detail, this is my interpretation that when you are having granted can if you are having at one place two businesses, then you cannot get separate registration because the requirement for registration says that if a person is having multiple place of business in a state, he may be granted separate registration for each place of business. And your common office is not each place of business, it is one place of business. So that's why in scenario one, I think he cannot get separate registration if he wants also. Clear? Any doubt on this? Yeah. Good, clear, Dhanlakshmi. Very nice. Others? Clear? Very good. Okay. Now, who's the definition of various people taxable person? A person who's registered or liable to be registered is a taxable person, and registered person is a person who is registered. Taxable person is brighter, bigger in ambit. That's why they say a tax is payable by a taxable person, which means a person who's registered will pay, and the person who is liable to register but he's not registered, he is also a taxable person. So, person once he crosses the limit, he will also have to pay the taxes to the government. Now, various sections, what we will discuss is mentioned, but we'll get into the sections directly. Every supplier of goods or services or both is required to obtain registration in a state or union territory from where he is making taxable supply. That is what section 22 says, provided his aggregate turnover is more than the specified threshold limit. So section 22 simply says that every supplier of goods or services or both is required to obtain registration in the state or union territory from where he is making taxable supply if his aggregate turnover is beyond the specified threshold limit in a financial year. That is, his aggregate turnover should be beyond some limit. Now, what is the aggregate turnover limit? It includes all the value of outward supplies, which is taxable supplies, exempt supplies, the exports, the interstate supplies of persons having the same PAN and shall be computed on all India basis. Right? That is the definition of aggregate turnover. It includes these things and it excludes certain things. What does it exclude? It excludes the CGST, SGST, UTGST, IGST parts. It also excludes the value of inward supplies because on inward supplies we pay reverse charge, correct? We have to pay reverse charge on certain inward supplies. So since I am paying tax on that, should I include that in my aggregate turnover? The definition clears it that on that you will claim the input tax credit. So you should not include that because that's your inward supply. Aggregate turnover will be of the outward supply. Okay. So that's the definition of aggregate turnover. Now, if this aggregate turnover crosses the 20 lakh rupees or 10 lakh rupees in special category states, then you will have to take your registration. Okay. So generally the category is 20 lakhs and 10 lakhs, but now we have multiple scenarios. Now, before that, in aggregate turnover, what we will exclude? We will exclude inward supplies on which tax is payable under reverse charge. You will also exclude the elements of taxes, that is CGST, SGST, and etc. But what will you include? You will include the aggregate turnover, that is the turnover of all branches, value of exports of goods and services, value of exempt goods. Aggregate turnover will also include supplies which is made by a taxable person, whether on his own account or made by his principals, that is the agent who is making all supplies made by a taxable person, whether on his own account or on behalf of his principals, will get included in his turnover. And aggregate turnover and turnover in a state are different. Aggregate turnover is the total turnover for the transactions made across branches in India, and turnover in a state will mean the specific GST's turnover in that state. Okay. Yeah. Now there is a Dayanand Sagar, he's an advocate. He's providing legal services to Azim Premji for rupees 30 lakh rupees. So the 30 lakh rupees will be the turnover, will be included in the turnover of Dayanand Sagar, or will it be included in the turnover of Azim Premji Private Limited? No questions. Forget questions. Answers. Yes, there are some answers. Gayatri Singh and Barna Mandal are saying that it will be the included in the aggregate turnover of Azim Premji Private Limited, and Dhanlakshmi and Amar Shinde are saying that it will be included in the turnover of Dayanand Sagar. So we are on equal footing. Two votes here, two votes here. So we need to have one tiebreaker. If there is anybody who is supporting, please tell me. Good. There's one person. Exemption chapter. I think today's topic is very, very huge, very large. So I'll not be able to cover the tips for exemption chapter. We'll discuss this probably tomorrow's class. I can tell you that, Dhanlakshmi. Soumya is a tiebreaker. Yes, she's saying it should be included in the Dayanand Sagar. So three people are saying, four people now, Simran also is now. So four people are saying that it should be included in the turnover of Dayanand Sagar and not included in the turnover of Azim Premji. Yes. Yes, so that's the correct answer. Majority wins. That is, it is included in the aggregate turnover of Dayanand Sagar, but the tax is payable by the recipient. So even though the taxable person doesn't pay the tax because it is tax paid under reverse charge basis, so the recipient will pay the tax, but for calculation, it will be added in the aggregate turnover of the supplier who is Dayanand Sagar. Okay. Aggregate turnover excludes the taxes. So it aggregate turnover excludes the CGST, SGST component. But what about TCS? We know TCS, they have given a circular and it said that it is an interim levy. So it is not having the characteristics of a tax. So don't include the value of TCS. Okay. Let's take an example. X supply goods to Y. When he supplies, the value of the goods is 10,000, 1,800 is this GST, and he will charge 100 rupees. So total he's collecting 11,900. So what was the first point we said here? That what has to be excluded? Aggregate turnover excludes the element of CGST, UTGST, and any kinds of GST taxes. But TCS is not a part of GST tax, it's a part of income tax. So should you include 100 in the value? Because from the total sale invoice, what I raised for 11,900, 1,800 is gone. That is clear. So should my value of supply be 10,100 or should it be 10,000? The circular says that TCS value should not be included. So from total 11,900, I will exclude the tax of the GST and I will exclude TCS. Apart from TCS, if there's any other tax, then you have to add. So my aggregate turnover for the purpose of this calculation of aggregate turnover, I will take only 10,000 rupees. Okay. Now take another example. X is registered under GST. He supplies service of renting to Y and he collects 10,000 monthly rent and he adds 1,500 and collects taxes on that. So in this case, what is his aggregate turnover? Whether it is 10,000 or 10,000 plus 1,500. You are saying 11,500, saying 10,000. No, in the first scenario, it will be 10,000 because GST and TCS need not be included. In second case, it is not GST or TCS, it is a municipal tax. So any tax other than CGST, SGST, UTGST, IGST, and cess has to be added. So we are adding this 1,500 municipal tax here. So total value for the second scenario is 10,000 plus 1,500, 11,500 rupees. Clear? So the registration limit, we know it is 10 lakhs for both goods and services for TNMM states, Tripura, Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur. And for other states, so first four states, 10 lakhs, six states, 20 lakhs, and the rest of the states, 20 and 40 lakhs. Just three limits. First is 10 lakhs for both goods and services for four states, 20 lakhs for goods and services for six states, and all other states 20 lakhs for services and 40 lakhs for goods. Now, in that limit of 40 lakhs, right, some people cannot opt for this. So people who are doing this businesses, they will have to pay, take the registration once they cross 20 lakhs itself. Persons covered under compulsory registration, first one. Then supplier of ice cream, pan masala, tobacco products, fly ash bricks, bricks of fossil meal, building bricks, earthen or roofing tiles, person opting for voluntary registration, and person engaged in intra-state supply in 10 states. So apart from this, if so supplier of ice cream cannot take the benefit of 40 lakh rupees. Supplier of fly ash bricks and other bricks cannot take the benefit of 40 lakh rupees. Once they cross 20 lakhs, they will have to take compulsory registration. Okay. Now, job worker. Now, will the turnover of job worker be whatever activities a job worker is doing, right? Will it be his turnover or will it be the turnover of the principal? Okay. Following supplies will not be included as the turnover of a job worker. Goods which is returning to the principal. Why? Because he's only holding it for doing some activity and he's not holding it in the principal to principal basis or as a ownership basis. So if he's returning the goods to the principal, it is not his supply. The supply will be only the job work charges. So the goods what is returning to the principal is not his supply. Then goods sent to another job worker. One job worker can take it and transfer it to another job worker. So that transfer to another job worker also is not his turnover. And scenario where the principal says you directly supply from your place to the end customer, that also is not his turnover because all of these transactions he's doing on behalf of the principal. That's the reason it will not be included as his turnover. Okay. Then registration for supply from or to. Registration is required only for a place from where you make a taxable supply. That is, agar आपका supply है and you're supplying in 10 states. You have 10 strong customers in 10 different states. So you don't have to register in those 10 states. You have to register at one place from where you're making a taxable supply. Okay. Now, what happens in terms of normal registration, we understand. But in case of special cases. That is where you are transferring a business. That is in case of a when should you take the registration in case of death of a proprietor? That is in the case of death of a proprietor when there's a death of date of transfer or date of succession. From that point of time, you have to take the registration. Okay. So date of transfer or date of succession, that is the time when you have to take your registration. And in case of amalgamation or demerger, the date, this is very important. When amalgamation happens, okay, it will have an effective date and it will have the date of change in registration certificate. Which registration certificate? The certificate of incorporation. So what you should do, practically what is happens is when you have to apply for amalgamation, you'll make an application to the court. That court is called as National Company Law Tribunal. So you have to make an application to this National Company Law Tribunal called as NCLT. And you have to wait for your hearing turns and you have to conduct all the meetings and other things. So you would have applied for amalgamation on 1st of April 2026, but your approval will come say on the December 2026 and your new certificate of registration, that when two companies are getting amalgamated, a new registration in the name of the amalgamated company comes on the 1st of December 2026. So from the application, what I filed in March till December, what will happen? Till that duration, whatever transactions are there, that has to be paid by the respective company. So that is the reason the effective date of registration for the new amalgamated entity will be from the date when the ROC issues certificate of incorporation and not the date of the court order, because court will tell, okay, I'm giving you an approval for amalgamation from the date when you applied for. And all the procedure happened because we have to comply with it. But GST says we cannot go to the backdated and take the registration. So when you get the new certificate of incorporation, that will be the date when you have to take registration form. Got it? Then compulsory registration, this we know that persons who's making interstate taxable supply, you should not wait for your limits. You should not wait till you cross the threshold limit. 100 rupees, 50 rupees or 1000 rupees transactions also, if you're making interstate supply, then your threshold will not apply. Immediately, your basic exemption will not apply. You will have to take registration once your interstate taxable supply starts. Okay. The limit of 20 lakhs and 40 lakhs is for a person who's making intrastate supply. Once he makes an interstate supply, then आपको immediately registration लेना है. Exception is interstate taxable services. So if you're making interstate taxable services, they're saying, okay, you don't have to take registration from rupee 1. You can wait till you touch your threshold limit. Okay. Second is a notified handicraft goods, a person who's having turnover up to 20 lakhs and 10 lakhs. He will have to wait till then take the registration, even if he's doing any interstate supply. So this dark blue is all the conditions and the light blue side is all the exceptions which is available. Second is a casual taxable person making taxable supplies. Then he will have to take registration. Exception is, of course, again, notified handicraft goods. But if a person is going to an exhibition in another state, he will have to take registration immediately. But the same person is going and selling notified handicraft goods, then he did not take the registration unless he crosses the threshold limit there. Then person required to pay tax under RCM. अगर आपको reverse charge पे pay करना है, then you will have to immediately take the registration. Exception is only one, that is a metal scrap supplier. A metal scrap supplier will take registration once he crosses the threshold limit. All other person who are paying reverse charge mechanism, they will have to take registration and pay it to the government. Then a non-resident taxable person, he will also have to take registration, need not wait for the threshold limit. E-commerce operator, need not wait for the threshold limit, but the person who is making intrastate supply of goods to the e-commerce operator, they can wait. For a person who's making interstate supply through e-commerce operator, they will not get the threshold benefit. The only benefit who will get is who's making intrastate supply through an e-commerce operator. TDS deductor, agent, input service distributor, OIDR, a person supplying money gaming from a place outside India, these people have to take registration, no exceptions available to them. So this is section 24, which is saying that section 22 said registration, but 24 is saying that following people have to take compulsory registration and should not wait to touch the threshold limit. Then every e-commerce operator who is required to collect tax at source, they will have to take registration compulsory. And persons who supply goods through e-commerce operator, if they're making intrastate supplies and if they're crossing the limit, only then they have to take the registration. So that's a clarification. Clear? Person who is not liable for registration. First, we saw section 22 that registration is required once you cross the threshold limit. Then section 24 said that compulsory registration, that even if you don't touch the threshold limit, you have to take registration. Then in between 22 and 24 comes 23, section 23, which says that people need not take registration. Who are not required to take registration? Person who is exclusively into the business of supplying of goods or services, which is not liable to tax. मतलब आप एग्जाम सप्लाई कर रहे हो, फुल्ली एग्जाम सप्लाई ही कर रहे हो, देन यू नीड नॉट टेक रजिस्ट्रेशन. अगर आपने टैक्सेबल सप्लाई कर दिया, देन यू विल हैव टू टेक. बट इफ यू आर डूइंग ओनली एग्जाम सप्लाई, यू नीड नॉट टेक अ रजिस्ट्रेशन. Enrollment number required? No, even enrollment number will not be required. Agriculturist, second category of person is an agriculturist to the extent of supply of produce out of the cultivation of land. जो भी अनाज खेत उपजाऊ करता है, on that he need not pay any GST. But if he has a vacant land and is giving it on rent for commercial purposes, then he will have to pay GST on that. Just because an agriculturist is doing some other activity doesn't mean he is not liable to pay tax. If he's doing any taxable supply other than the supplying of produce from his land, that is खेत से उगा के काटने के अलावा अगर कुछ और करता है, तब उसके ऊपर जीएसटी लगेगा. लेकिन एग्रीकल्चरिस्ट टू द एक्सटेंट ऑफ सप्लाई ऑफ प्रोड्यूस आउट ऑफ द कल्टिवेशन ऑफ लैंड, ही नीड नॉट पे टैक्स. He need not be liable for registration. Definition of agriculturist is an individual or HUF who undertakes cultivation of land either by his own labor or by his family or by the hiring laborers. So whichever way and he runs the agriculture farm, he is called as an agriculturist. If e-commerce operator is selling only in intrastate, yes, then he need not take registration. Correct, Gayatri. But it is not from the perspective of e-commerce operator. It is the person who is supplying through that e-commerce operator. Okay. E-commerce operator will always take it, but the person who's supplying through that e-commerce operator, if he's doing only intrastate supply, then he need not register. Up to 20 lakhs and 40 lakhs. Then specified persons who will be notified. That is a person who is making only RCM supply, like a GTA. He is not registered and he is giving only consignment note. And on a GTA, we have two options, whether he can register and pay taxes or need not register and the recipient will pay. So in our example, a GTA is a person who's making only RCM supplies and he said that he will not pay the taxes. Then in that case, the recipient will have to pay taxes on the supply made by the advocate or anybody. So on their behalf, the recipient will pay taxes to the government. Exception is supply of metal scraps, because metal scraps also is under reverse charge. Their person making only RCM supplies, that doesn't matter because they are into the scrap business and anytime they have to pay. So there is no exceptions to them. Then persons making interstate taxable supply of services up to 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs for TNMM, and interstate supply of notified handicraft goods. There also the limit is 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs. Clear? So these people need not take registration. Person who's making RCM supply, person who's making interstate supply of services up to 20 lakhs, person making providing services through e-commerce up to 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, interstate supply of notified enter groups, and interstate supply of notified products made by craftsmen predominantly by hand. Okay, these people need not take registration immediately. Commission agent or sales or purchase of agriculture produce, there also principal should be a taxable person and supplies made by commission agent should be taxable. Only in that case, the person who has told him that, okay, take care of the water resources will be there. Otherwise, it is not required. Person providing services through e-commerce is interstate means registration compulsory. Person providing services through an e-commerce is interstate means registration compulsory. No. If he's making through e-commerce, it doesn't mean it will be interstate and he has to take registration. There's a separate category that if you are supplying through an e-commerce operator, then you have to take registration immediately. That's why he will take a registration. What is TNMM on the slide? TNMM is that acronym for four states: Tripura, Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur. Four states, the limit is 10 lakhs. So that's why I've called it as TNMM in short. Because a person providing services through e-commerce up to 20 lakhs and 10 lakhs of then 10 lakhs for TNMM states. So the limit for them is less. That's why I've called this. Okay, let's proceed now. Such person should not exceed the threshold limit in the preceding financial year, thus shall not make any interstate supply. That is, if you're making through e-commerce and you don't want to take registration, then you should make supplies to the e-commerce and e-commerce should make only interstate supply. Only make intrastate supply. They should not make any interstate supply. Person should not make supply of goods through e-commerce operator in more than one state. Okay. Take e-commerce, so they should not make supply of goods through e-commerce in more than one state. And such person shall be required to have a PAN issued. Definitely, they should have a PAN number and shall making any supply of goods to e-commerce declare on the common portal. They should declare, then registration will not be required. But they will be granted an enrollment number, and they shall not be granted more than one enrollment number in a state. That is, even though they are not required to register, but to make the government aware what is their turnover, they have to make the declaration, and they have to make a submission online saying that this is my turnover. So to state that every time their threshold limit, their turnover is below the threshold limit, and they're making only intrastate supply and not any interstate supplies. Okay. Persons not liable to register, this we have seen. The procedure for registration, very simple, that within 30 days, when you become liable for registration, you have to register. That is, once you cross the threshold limit, आपको उसी दिन registration करने की जरूरत नहीं है. Once you cross the threshold limit, you have 30 days time limit to apply for registration. So you should apply within 30 days from when you become liable for registration. That is, when will you become? Once you cross the threshold limit. Okay. And a casual taxable person or a non-resident taxable person, they are special people, right? They have to take registration in advance. So at least a businessman, that once he's liable to register, he gets 30 days from the date when he is liable for registration. But a CTP, that is a casual taxable person or a non-taxable, non-resident taxable person, they have to apply 5 days before the commencement. Why? Because they're going to another state. Now, what are the modalities of that person? That new officer in that state doesn't know. So that's the reason within 30 days from the date when you became liable for registration, you have to apply for it. But in case of CTP and NRTP, you have to apply in advance. 5 days before you start your business, you have to take the registration. Why? Because once you apply for the registration in advance, you have to make a deposit. That's the reason a CTP and NRTP has to take a registration 5 days in advance. This is fine. Voluntary registration and distinct person. We know that who is a distinct person, who is having multiple registrations in a state, or same person having different registration in different states. CUIN, okay, that's only theoretical part. Suo moto registration, that in a case where you don't apply for registration, but the officer feels that your limit is crossed, then he will give you a registration that is called as suo moto registration. Now we'll see the procedure for registration. That is, applicant will make an application in this form called Form REG01 in Part A. It will have three details here. No department's intervention is required. You will mention your PAN. PAN number will get validated with the number what is there in the portal, and that same name will appear here. Mobile number will be authenticated to an OTP. Email ID, again one OTP will be sent to the email ID once you verify it. All this first step is completed. Okay, so first step is REG1 Part A, then second is REG1 Part B, wherein you're making an complete information here. In Part A, only basic information, only three things. In Part B, complete information. Once you submit everything, right? All your state, where your address proof, your director's proof, your registration, your basic address के लिए rental agreement, all those documents when you submit, then you will get an acknowledgement. Once the acknowledgement is correct, right, and all the details what you have submitted is correct, then you will get a registration in Form REG06, but that doesn't happen, wherein your documents are somewhere in default. So it will be treated as notice seeking clarification. Notice seeking additional details or clarifications will come to you through this notice in Form GST REG03. Then you will reply to it in Form REG04. If the details are correct, you will give it. Otherwise, you will again go back and he will reject the application. So officer sitting over there has both the powers to grant your registration or not grant you the registration. Okay. So what's the timeline? That if the proper officer, he examines the application and accompanying documents, and if found everything in order, then within 7 working days, he will give you the registration. Otherwise, registration has to be granted within 30 days. But difference between 7 and 30 days is your Aadhaar should be authenticated. If you don't authenticate your Aadhaar, then your registration will get delayed. So first, when you apply for registration, advise your clients that keep your Aadhaar handy, keep the mobile number linked to your Aadhaar handy. Because most of the time, what happens when you link your Aadhaar, the OTP goes to some other person and not to that same person. So you have to link your Aadhaar with your primary mobile number. Okay. And otherwise, registration is granted within 30 days. That is where applicant fails to undergo Aadhaar authentication or does not opt for Aadhaar authentication. In both these scenarios, what happens when the PO seems that it is fit to carry out site verification? Okay. Where proper officer deems fit to carry out any site verification, then also registration will be granted within 30 days because he has to do the site verification. And where a person who has not undergone Aadhaar authentication is identified in the common portal based on data analysis and risk parameters. So they have some risk parameters and data analysis. There also they will get extra 30 days time limit. They will not give you a registration hurry. They will tell you are coming under the risk parameters criteria. So we will not give you the registration instantly. Deemed approval is when they don't act on time. So within 7 days, you have done your Aadhaar authentication, and within 7 days, they don't give you the registration, then automatically you will get a registration. And where a person doesn't do the Aadhaar authentication, there they get a 30 days time limit. Unless they raise any objections, within 30 days, they will give you the registration certificate automatically. And in a case where a notice is issued and you're given clarification, there also they get a time limit of 7 days. If they don't react anything, then at the end of seventh day, you will get the registration automatically. Whose Aadhaar authentication has to be done? Of course, in the individual, in case of a director, managing partner, or karta. There's nothing here. The risk-based, biometric-based Aadhaar authentication, that is, you have to get a biometric verification done at the time of taking registration. Okay, this is fine. Let's get into the main aspects. Bank account details. While applying for registration, should you give your bank details? No, because bank is asking for GST certificate, and GST certificate at the time of applying GST certificate, they have a column of bank account details, and I don't have a bank account. So what should we do in that case? You have to give within 30 days if bank account information is not given. Correct. So the GST also understood that unless I give my GST registration, the bankers will not open. Earlier, they used to say no, along with registration, you have to compulsory give your bank account. But then they realized they said that at the time of registration, if you have, give it. If you do not have, okay, then you have to submit it within 30 days from the date of grant of registration or the date of furnishing the details of outward supply, whichever is earlier. That is, before filing GSTR 1 or 30 days, whichever is earlier, you have to give your bank details. Otherwise, the registration, what is there, that will get cancelled. Then you will apply and give it. Then your registration will get revoked. Then your registration will get revived. Okay. A physical verification, when they will do, if a PO is satisfied that physical verification is required after grant of registration, then he can do it. Or physical verification is required before grant of registration. In either the case, the proper officer, PO here in GST means the proper officer. The proper officer will upload the physical verification report with the documents and photographs within 15 working days from the date of verification. That is, when he's granted you the registration, then he can say verify it. But where physical verification is required at the time of grant of registration itself, right? They're saying on the criteria that you have to go and do the physical verification. Then they will do it within 5 working days prior to the completion of the time for registration. Like we have the 7 days and 30 days time limit. Usse 5 days pehle they have to do the physical verification and close it. Okay. Effective date of registration, if you have applied within 30 days, in case of a compulsory registration, you have applied within 30 days, then the date when you became liable for registration, that will be the effective date. SNA I have applied today, officer has given me a registration after 60 days. The date when the registration certificate is issued, that is the date. No. In the registration certificate, we have the date of approval and the effective date of registration. So in the registration certificate, you will see a column which is called as effective date of registration. That is what we have to see. So that will be the date. If we have applied on time, then the date when we apply for it. But if we apply late, if you apply after 30 days, then the actual date of issuing that, which is called as date of grant of registration, that will be the effective date of registration. Okay. Format of GST and theoretical CTP and RTP we know. Differentiation also we know. The validity of registration for a CTP is that in case of normal registration, it is unlimited validity. But in case of a CTP and NRTP, the validity is just for 90 days, which is it's a temporary registration. It can get extended by another 90 days. So 90 plus 90, 180 days is the thing for the registration. Beyond 180 days, you cannot do it. You have to take a new registration. Okay. Amendment, if you want to amend it, there are core fields and non-core fields. Non-core field, again, same email ID, mobile numbers. Their approval of the officer is not required. You apply online, get the OTP, verify it, that is completed. But if you have to amend some core fields like name of the business, addition of any of the stakeholders, principal place of business, address change, their approval of the officer will be required. There again, same procedure. You apply for amendment. If it is change of PAN, then it is not an amendment, it's a new registration because GST is based on PAN. If your PAN itself is getting changed, why will it get changed? You are a proprietorship, you're getting transferred as a partnership, you are a LLP, you got converted into a private limited, then there's a change in PAN itself. If there's a change in PAN, there's a fresh registration. Otherwise, the PAN is same, there is some changes in your business, your changes in the address, then you will apply. GST officer, he is happy, he's convinced, then within 15 days, he will approve the amendment and give you a new registration. Yeah, else if he needs any clarification, he will issue a notice. Then you should reply within 7 days in form REG04. And the GST officer, if there's no response again within time, then your change is automatically approved or he should approve it. If he doesn't approve it and he rejects it, then he'll give you an order in REG05. If you want to change the nature of business, then you have to apply for amendment. If you want to change the nature of business, you have to apply for amendment. And in the business criteria, earlier you would have mentioned trader. Now you want to mention as manufacturer. So you'll mention as manufacturer, change the HSN codes and apply for it. Officer will verify it and then he'll give you an approval. Then cancellation. Cancellation, you have applied for registration, you want to cancel? Yes, you can cancel. Either the tax payable can cancel, taxpayer can cancel, the officer can cancel, or third is both are not there, the proprietor itself is dead, or the business itself is closing down. In that case, it can be cancelled by the legal heir because that person who's the proprietor, he's no more, he's dead. So the legal heirs can apply for cancellation. When will the taxpayer himself cancel? If his turnover is crossed or in any other cases, he feels that business is not feasible, then he can cancel it. Business discontinued, transferred fully, amalgamation, demerger are disposed of. In that, there's a change in constitutional and taxable person is not longer liable for registration, then they can opt for cancellation. And when the proper officer will cancel, when you're not conducting business from that place, you've taken registration in your shop and you're not conducting any business. The officer comes for verification. He finds that you're not there. That case, registration will get cancelled. When you issue invoice without supply of goods, you are doing violation of the provisions. You have to pay GST and make supply, but you're not making supply, but just raising invoice. Okay, you're issuing invoice without supply. You're making fake invoices. Then your registration will get cancelled, or you're violating the provisions of anti-profiteering, violating the provisions of not permitting the bank account details. Then also officer can cancel it. And you're availing ITC without having the fulfilling the provisions of Section 16. We know Section 16, so many conditions are there, and there one typical case is you're not buying the goods, you're not getting the goods, but you're getting in only invoice. There also your registration get cancelled. You're furnishing details in outward supply in excess of amounts declared in your valid returns. GSTR 1 and 3B, we know both should be same, but you're making lot of transactions in one but not paying taxes in 3B. There also the registration is liable for cancellation. Then other things is you're violating the provisions of 96B, which is we know no that if your turnover is more than your taxable person is more than 50 lakhs, then you have to pay at least 1% by cash. You're not doing that. There also your officer can cancel the registration. You're violating the provisions of Rule 23(1). Okay. In all these scenarios, GST registration will get cancelled. You're not filing the returns. That is a composition scheme person. He's furnishing late returns. Late can happen sometimes, but cannot happen beyond 3 months. Because only one return you have to file, and you're not filing that also beyond, and they've given you 3 months time extra also. You're not filed the returns, you're not, then your registration get cancelled. In case of a normal registration, you're not filed the returns for a period of 6 months, then also your registration can get cancelled. Voluntary registration, that is a person who has not commenced the business. You've got your registration, but you're not commenced your business. There also registration can get cancelled. So in these scenarios, cancellation can happen by the officer. Registration was taken by fraudulently giving a wrong address, giving a wrong Aadhaar. Those cases also registration can get cancelled. Suspension, what happens is your registration, when you apply for cancellation, it doesn't go for cancellation immediately. It goes for suspension mode from the date of submission or from an earlier date till the completion of cancellation. So once you apply for cancellation, it goes into suspended mode. The officer does the verification till that cancellation, that is in suspended mode, which means what? During that time, you need not do any filing of returns. It is under suspension mode. Fine. So at the time of cancellation, what you have to pay, whatever is the, in case of your inputs, whatever is your ITC available on that, that is ITC on inputs computed proportionately. Whatever input tax credit you have taken, you have to calculate proportionate or output tax payable on those goods. Whichever is higher is what you'll pay. Not always that you will have old stock, you will pay the taxes less. So, but you have claimed high amount of ITC. So you have to do a comparison. What is your ITC, what you have taken, and what is the tax payable? Whichever is higher is what you have to pay. So this is a very important slide. And similarly for capital goods, what is the ITC you have taken reduced by the depreciation of 5% for every quarter. So you will reduce that depreciation, calculate that, and you will calculate the tax on the sale value of that asset. Whichever is higher is what you will pay the taxes to the government. So these two slides are very important. That is, what will be the tax you will pay on cancellation. You have to do a comparison of the ITC, what you have taken, and what is the tax payable. Whichever is higher, you have to consider. And revocation of cancellation, that is, officer has applied for cancellation. Okay. And you want to revoke it, you can revoke. You have a time limit of 90 days time. But if you missed, then you can have an additional time of 90 days by taking approval from the additional commissioner, joint commissioner, or commissioner. And if the proper officer is satisfied, then he will revoke your cancellation. Revocation means registration is cancelled. You want to give it a rebirth. That is called as revocation of cancellation. While they are giving revocation for that period, that is the effective date till the date of cancellation, whatever returns you have not filed, you have to file it. Only then your cancellation will get revoked. Okay. So that was on registration. So what we'll do is, it's almost 7:20 now. By 7:25, let us assemble and discuss on the other topics. Can we start, sir? So we were discussing on the first topic of registration. Now we'll proceed with the tax invoices under GST, right? Now, what is the invoice? Why it is required? It's a commercial instrument which is issued by a supplier to a recipient. So supplier will supply, and that's it. No, after supply, he will have to give a document to prove what is there in the material, what is the material he supplied, what is the value, and those details. So that's why he will give a commercial document, that is establishment as a contract also, right? Contract is not only signing a contract, a invoice also is a contract in that aspect, that the parties, whatever they're agreed at the price is written down in that invoice. So it's a commercial instrument which is issued by the supplier to the recipient. Okay. Okay. And GST law under Section 31 mandates for issuance of an invoice. Section 31 says that whenever you make a supply, you have to issue an invoice or a bill of supply. So normally invoice is when you charge something, you collect taxes, that's an invoice. And in a case where you don't collect tax, that is if you're making any exempt supply or a person who is under composition scheme, he will not charge GST, correct? Because under composition scheme, you will pay less taxes and you cannot collect it from your customers. So there also you will issue a bill of supply. And it's an essential document for what purpose? Because in section 16, we've understood, right, that one of the essential conditions is the recipient should have the invoice in hand. So that is also the relevance, that recipient can claim the credit only when you raise the invoice and it is with him in his possession. Only then he can claim the credit. So it's an essential document to avail the ITC as well. And there's no format prescribed under law. It says that invoice should be there, and it says that what all the contents should be there. They have not given like a specific format that this invoice letterhead should be there. GST number should be mentioned on the top. It should be mentioned in the in the bottom. No, they've just said that the contents, what is required for the invoice, should be there. It can be anywhere in the invoice document. Okay. What is the time limit for issuance of invoice? We have discussed this, but just as a brush up, time limit for goods is where the supply involves movement of goods before the removal of the goods. And when the supply does not involve movement of goods, then it will be the delivery of the goods are making available. Before this, you should raise the invoice. And for services, since it is intangible, within 30 days from the date of supply of service. And for insurance banking company, the taxable supplies between distinct persons, there are two time limits. Here it is 30 days and 45 days for insurance, and for insurance banking company and other things when it is recorded in the supplier's book or before the expiry of the quarter. For these companies, it is given that for any supply from one banking company to another, but a banking company providing services to its customer, then they will raise within 45 days, and for normal cases within 30 days. And when there is a continuous supply, we know the definition, so we'll not repeat it. For case of continuous supply goods, that is where the due date of payment is ascertainable, then in that case, that is the time limit. Where it is not ascertainable in the contract, then supplier of service receives the payment, that will be the time limit. And in all other cases where the payment is linked to completion of an event on the due date of completion of an event. So when that milestone is reached, before that you should raise an invoice. Okay. And time of supply of goods, which is sent on approval basis, the date when the buyer approves it, or 6 months from the date of removal, whichever is earlier. So this is what we have decided in time of supply, and which is also mentioned in invoice, saying that when you should raise an invoice. These are the minimum required for an invoice. Fine, this we understand. HSN, how much of digits of HSN should you mention? Because here it says that one of the criteria is you should mention the HSN. So how many digits of HSN you should mention? Up to 5 crores turnover if you have, that is your annual turnover, then you should mention for B2B supplies 4 digits, and B2B supplies also 4 digits, which is optional. For B2B supply, you have to compulsory mention 4 digits. And if your turnover is beyond 5 crores, then for all the supplies, you should mention 6 digits of your HSN code. Okay. How many invoices you have to send for supply of goods? Triplicate copy, one for yourself, one for the original for the recipient, one for the transporter, and triplicate for the supplier. And duplicate will be in case of supply of services, that is, there is no transporter. So one copy for the recipient, one copy for the supplier. So goods, three copies, one for the receiver, one for the transporter, one for the supplier. And in case of services, one for the receiver and one for the supplier. Revised tax invoice possible? Yes. I've applied for registration. That is, I have a timeline for 30 days. Correct. So between that time, whatever invoices I raised, that is when I was due for registration, I've applied. Now my registration has not yet come. During that period, whatever supplies I make, in that I will not mention my GST number. Correct. So in that scenarios, the recipient wants to get the credit. So those invoices only I can revise. In normal cases, when you make a mistake, can you rectify it? You cannot. So what happens that when you take a new registration for that period, you can revise your invoice. Okay. Now that brings me to a question saying that, okay, in a original registration case, I can issue a revised invoice. Now I've done my business. I'm in my second year of business, and my invoice, I should have mentioned 1 lakh rupees. I've added 10 extra. Okay. I should have mentioned the invoice value as 1 lakh, but I mentioned 10 extra. I've called it as 10 lakh rupees. So in that case, can I revise the invoice? If yes, good. If no, then what's the solution? Come on. Gayatri, you have to give a specific answer. You're a professional student now. You can't give options. If you give options, then examiner also will give you optional marks. Be specific. My question was specific, that I have raised the invoice for 10 lakhs, but I should have raised the actual invoice for 1 lakh. I've added 10 extra. You can't do alteration invoice. Correct, Dhanalakshmi. So what should I do? Now customer is saying, boss, you should have raised me 1 lakh. You have raised 10 lakhs. I will not pay you. So at least on that 1 lakh effort I would have raised, I would have got 18,000 as a GST. Now GST I have to pay. Now, what do I do in terms of documentation? We can rectify it in the month of identifying the error and get refund. Um, that's not the provision. Provision says something else. If there's a mistake, you can do something. What is that something is exactly my question. Dhanlakshmi, correct. Your answer is right. Total amount equal to GST and value of goods. Not clear, Arun Sagar. You have raised the invoice for a value higher than the value what you're supposed to raise. So you have to reduce that value. You have raised the invoice for 10 lakhs. Now you have to rectify it. How will you rectify it? By issuing a credit note. Correct, Arun Sagar. Current Dhanlakshmi. You have raised the invoice for 10 lakhs. Now you will raise the invoice. You will raise a credit note for 9 lakh rupees. So 10 minus 9 makes it 1. Correct? You have to raise for 1 lakh. That is how you will arrive at 10 lakhs is wrongly raised. Now you will correct it by rectifying revision is not possible. So you will raise a credit note. You will raise a credit note for 9 lakh rupees, and then that will get reduced from the value of supply. So net will be 1 lakh rupees. Okay. No debit note. Debit note will be in case of reverse scenario. But in this scenario, where you have to bring down the value, you will raise a credit note. Yes. The When you raise the invoice for 10 lakhs, he is taken credit on 10 lakhs. Correct, Arun? So he will have to reverse the ITC to the extent of 9 lakhs. So you will raise a credit note basis that he will revise the ITC or reverse the ITC, and then you will pay the taxes on the 1 lakh rupees. Okay, understood the concept of credit note. Non-issuance of tax invoice, that in some cases you don't have to, where the value of goods is less than 200 rupees and recipient is unregistered. There you don't have to raise separate invoice. You can raise a consolidated tax invoice for that, because you're collecting taxes. The government is not saying that don't collect taxes, but if your value is less, you're saying like you're selling some keychains for 50 rupees, 100 rupees, and some recipient are saying, don't give me invoice. They're ready to pay taxes just like that. You have to account it and issue a consolidated tax invoice for each day. Bill of supply, like we discussed, you're making exempted supply, or a person is making only composite taxable person. There you can give a bill of supply. And invoice come bill of supply can be made when supplying both, that is, you're making taxable supply and exempt supply. There you can give invoice come bill of supply. Can a person do any transaction related business during the suspension period? No, during suspension period, you cannot do any business. Okay. But if he does anything, yeah, during suspension, if you've done any business, you can include that you can't issue a revised invoice itself, because you have not issued an invoice. You have to report it after your suspension period. Good question, Arun. Now, tax invoice, credit note, if you collect some money, okay, you have to give the other person receipt. So that's called as a receipt voucher. Then if you refund it, okay, then you have to give a refund voucher. So take a receipt voucher, supply doesn't happen, you refund it, you will give a refund voucher. Then invoice voucher and payment voucher, these are all part of it. Now, reverse charge, where recipient is registered and receives the supply taxable under reverse charge, then the supplier is registered, he will give a payment voucher. If the supplier is unregistered, then also a payment voucher will be issued. So basically, in both the cases, reverse charge recipient has to pay, so he will issue a payment voucher. Then there are other documents like delivery challan. That is when you're making any job working or you're moving goods which is not for sale. In such scenarios, you will give a delivery challan. Okay, delivery challan is basically for movement of goods, but it is not a supply. Because if it had been supply, you would have raised a tax invoice. Like if you're giving goods on lots, you will raise one consolidated invoice. But for delivery through these lots, you will give a delivery challan. Credit notes, debit notes, we have understood this. Time limit. So there is a time limit within which you can raise a credit note. Branch to branch transfer also is a good example, Arun. Yes, that when you're making from transfer from one branch to another branch, you're supposed to raise an invoice. You cannot raise a delivery challan there, because within the state, if you have separate registration, then you will raise an invoice. But within the state, having one registration, there you will give a delivery challan. Good. Now, this credit note, debit note you can give anytime because there it's a revenue to the government. But credit note, you have to give it for the transactions for this year by the 30th November from the end of the financial year or the date of furnishing annual return, whichever is earlier. So you have a time limit to issue a credit note. Any mistakes happen, you can rectify it within 30th November of the next year, not beyond that. But for debit note, it is an increase. You can declare it in any month during which you are issuing a debit note. TCS and tax collection, this is fine. Then e-invoicing. Now, e-invoicing is what? It is not like raising an invoice on a computer is called as e-invoicing. E-invoicing is a separate method wherein immediately once you raise an invoice, the report goes to the government, right? So it is a seamless or online invoicing. That is, all your invoice details, you will upload it on a separate portal called as a e-invoicing portal. Once you put the details there, then what happens? Let's not discuss this slides because there are too many confusing things in the e-invoicing, mostly theoretical. So we'll just discuss it over here online. Okay. So what is e-invoicing? E-invoicing is not like a just a raising an invoice on the computer. E-invoicing means you are raising a invoice on the government portal. You will give all the details, the suppliers GST and recipients GST and HSN quantity, whatever contents are there in an invoice, those details you will update it on the e-invoicing portal, and then it will validate it and give a IRN number. Okay. From that IRN number, it becomes a unique number that you will have to print it in your invoice and give it to the receiver. To your customer, you have to give it. So what happens is all your data is locked with the IRN number. Once you put the IRN number, all the details will be appearing to you and appearing to the customer and appearing to the officer. So in between one place to another place, when you're transporting those goods, in between, if there's a check post or some officer finds out and there is a criteria. If you cross a limit of 5 crore rupees, you have to raise a e-invoice. Now, if you crossed it and you have not raised the e-invoice, then the officer will say, no, we will not let you pass the goods. Okay. So there, in such cases, you will have to raise a e-invoice. He will see that e-invoice number has been mentioned. He will cross-verify it. Only then he will let the goods to pass. Otherwise, he will tell you have violated the conditions. We will not let you to move the goods. Okay. Now, this e-invoices is compulsory for any B2B supplies. For B2C, it is not required. For B2B and B2G, B2B is from one registered person to another registered person, and B2G is from business to government. From one business to any government, if you supply, then also e-invoice is required. Exports, e-invoice is required. Supplying it through e-commerce and supplies on which reverse charges payable. On this, you will have to raise a e-invoice. But for import of goods and import of services, and if you're paying reverse charge on yourself, then e-invoicing is not required. But exports, e-invoicing is required. Okay. That's the e-invoicing part. I'll just show you now the e-invoicing portal. How does it work? Yeah. So this is a e-invoicing portal. You will have a separate login for this, which is based on your GSTI and login itself. Mention those details. Then mention all this detail. Enter your GSTI number. Enter the business applicant name and things like that. Your name you will mention. That is the initial one time for your registration. Then you will go to the dashboard and generate the e-invoice. What you will mention the category, whether it is B2B, B2G or export. Then is it regular or reverse charge, or is it through an e-commerce operator? Document type, that is whether it's an invoice, delivery challan, bill of supply, the invoice number, the date, the transaction type. all this gets auto-populated because when you did registration, all these details had come. And to whom you supply, mention his GSTI number, all these details will come. You have to mention the item-wise product name, HSN code, total multiple products can be added. And once you save this, what happens? And submit it, a e-invoice gets printed, which is the IRN having 1464-digit number, acknowledgement number, and all the details what you entered will get auto-populated. So invoice in digital form is your e-invoice, but it has more to it because it is having a 64-digit number. Through this number, all your transactions can be reflected. Okay, so that is how a e-invoice is getting generated. Then, okay, dynamic QR code. So now we understood invoice, we understood e-invoice. We'll take up some MCQs so that now you can participate effectively. Okay. I want active participation here. Can we cancel or alter? No, e-invoice cannot be cancelled or altered. That is very important. You cannot alter or cancel the e-invoice. Once generated, done. The advantage of e-invoices, once you do the e-invoice, you don't have to include it in your GSTR1. It will automatically go and sit in your GSTR1. And from that, you can also raise a e-waybill. Then you have to only verify in your GSTR1. If it has got cancelled, then you have to click on cancel. Otherwise, you don't have to duplication of transaction. Once you enter the transaction e-invoice in your GSTR1, also it comes up. Is it mandatory to mention the details of tax amount charged in the invoice? When I make credit note, should me pass e-invoice for credit note? Yes, I think for credit note, invoice, credit note, and debit note, e-invoice is required. Yes. Yes. Invoice, credit note, and debit note. Only for these three documents, e-invoice required. For credit, for delivery challan, bill of supply, and job work, there e-invoice is not required. So only for three documents, e-invoice is required, which is sale invoice, debit note, and credit note. Answer is C. B is also correct, but C is more specific since it says that it is mandatory, and also you should mention the nature of tax. Nature of the tax ka matlab, whether it is CGST, SGST, or IGST. So you have to mention that as well. So the correct answer is C. Tax credit note can be taken on tax credit can be taken on the basis of, answer is E. It can be taken on the basis of invoice and debit note. Okay. Yeah. People have given bill of supply is for exempt supply, composite supply, taxpayer, no tax, correct, no credit, correct, Gayatri. Bill of supply normally issued by composition dealer. Correct. So answer is E. Good. Correct. Earlier of the two dates, that is 30th November or date of filing relevant return, whichever is earlier. Correct. As it increases the revenue, it can be issued anytime. So for time limit for debit note is T. Correct. Correct, Arun Sagar. Correct, Gayatri. Correct answers. Soumya, correct. Right. Amar, your answer also is right. And the answer is 29th September because before removal of the goods. 6D, it is C. No, Soumya, annually one return is there. He has to file nil returns. The company has not received taxable during a quarter. What should he do in respect of return filing? He should file nil returns. Like GST, the thing is once you're registered, if you don't have transactions, if there's no option of not filing, you have to file nil returns. Yes, yes, to all registered persons. E-way will come, but just a basic understanding on e-way you can have now. That once you make a mistake in the e-way bill, Okay. You can edit it within 24 hours. But if there is a mistake and wrong entry enable, then which you cannot correct it, then the option is C that you have to cancel the e-waybill and generate a new one. Okay. You can't do anything. You can't edit it. You have to cancel it with if you have the time limit. If you don't have the time limit, then you have to just leave it and generate a new e-waybill. If the validity of e-waybill is expired, then you should not remove the goods movement because at the time of movement, you will get caught. So you should not move it. That is first thing. And the transporter may extend the validity period after updating the reason for extension. Say because they are expired, but the lorry got punctured or there is some repair. Then the transporter may extend it. So you should not move and transporter can extend both. So answer is B. Okay. So now we'll go to the next topic quickly on accounts and records. This is also a very kind of small topic, nothing huge in this. Okay, accounts and records is like, firstly, before getting into accounts and records, tell me which is the most powerful section under GST. 73, 74, ITC. No, all those are provisions to keep the law or to follow the law. But from a taxpayer's perspective, there is one very important provision, which is just simple two-line provision of the law, which is called as self-assessment, which means that every registered person shall self-assess the taxes which is payable under this act and furnish a return for each tax period as specified under section 39, which means that this section is a powerful section because it is giving the power to the taxpayer like you and me to do a assessment. And we, instead of the officer doing assessment, we can do our own assessment. This is called as self-assessment. Okay. We will do the self-assess our taxes and we will declare the returns. And if the officer doesn't do any reassessment, then our assessment itself is final. That's why self-assessment provisions are a very strong provision. It says that a registered person will do the self-assessment. The power of assessment, what the officer has, you also have as a taxpayer. That's why this is a very powerful section that it is giving the power to the taxpayer to do the assessment on his own. Okay. As per the above section, every taxpayer has to do an assessment for his own books and file the return. So the officer will not come to your premises. He will not come and check whether what you are doing is right or wrong. He will take the returns because you are doing your assessment and filing the returns. So he'll assume that is correct unless he challenges it through various provisions under section 73, 74 and other things. So that's the reason this is a very powerful provision under the GST law. Now, how does he do it? He will maintain accounts, records, and other documentary. So that's why that comes to the topic of accounts and records. Once you maintain the accounts and records correctly, then you will do your self-assessment. That's why self-assessment takes the power from the books of accounts what you maintain. Where should the books of accounts be maintained? At the principal place of business. Responsibility is also cast on the owner of the warehouse. So first is who should maintain the books of accounts? The owner. Where he should maintain at the principal place of business. And additional responsibility is also cast on the operator of the warehouser or go down for any place used for storage of the goods. So wherever you store the goods, you cannot tell that no records are not maintained there. There, the warehouse person also has to maintain because multiple goods are there. Now, whose goods are there? How will they know? That's why a responsibility is cast on the warehouse person also saying that you have to maintain records of the stock of the various people. Not like a detailed one, but at least you should know whose stock is maintained where. So responsibility is cast on him also saying that, okay, if the officer comes and says, okay, I will take away these goods, the warehouse person shouldn't be shocked that whose goods is this, I don't know. He should know at least the goods belongs to whom. Okay. And accounts can be maintained in electronic or non-electronic form. That is, it can be maintained manually or electronically. Both are permitted. And there's no prescribed format again for accounts. Like how invoice, there's no prescribed format. There's just said that some description should be there. Like that, accounts also, there's no prescribed format. You maintain according to your accounting practice. Maintain in Tally, maintain in QuickBooks, maintain in Zoho, maintain any software or maintain manually. Anything is possible. Whatever minimum requirements is required, I will tell as a lawyer, as a lawmaker, the lawmaker will tell these requirements is there. Once you maintain it, that is sufficient. Okay. Principal place of business. Now, accounts to be maintained, books of accounts. Now, each person basically will have to maintain these basic records: production or manufacturing of goods, inward and outward supply, stock records, input tax credit, output tax payable, and such other particles. That is, this basic information is to be required to be maintained by everybody. That is, your production of goods, your inward and outward supply of goods or services, your whatever goods you're coming in and your goods going out, and for services coming in, services going out, stock record if you're maintaining goods, input tax credit avail, and output tax payable, and what is output tax paid. So basically, your sales and purchases should be intact for everyone. Same thing. Then, what are additional records to be maintained? That if you're an importer or exporter, the goods or services, what is imported or exported, supplies on which reverse charge is applicable, then those details, separate account of advances received and paid, name and complete address of the supplier, and name and complete address of your persons to whom you have supplied. That is name and address of your suppliers and name and address of your customers also. Because if you're buying from somebody, then they can verify him, no, because you're availing input tax credit, whether that person has done his transactions correctly or no, because basis him, you are claiming the credit. That's why those records also has to be maintained properly. And wherever you're storing the goods, complete address of the places where you're storing those goods, they are also required. Additional records to be maintained, stock details and details of tax. Okay. Now, special people. That was still general people, what is to be maintained. Now, special people like agent. Agent has to maintain the records of the principal, what is the quantity of goods which he is received from the principal, what he's supplying to the principal, what is the accounts between this principal and agent, those things. Then manufacturer. Again, this is very theoretical, but once you understand the flow, that a manufacturer, what he'll do is do manufacturing goods. So he will require raw materials, the details of raw materials, what is the manufacturer details, those will be required. Service provider, quantitative details of goods which is using for his services, details of input service received, and details of services supplied. So that's how the each flow is here. So instead of boring you guys with all this detail, we'll straight away go to the MCQ because you will understand this. It's a self-explanatory thing. During the course of MCQ itself, if there's something to explain, I will explain you. Otherwise, you will get the confidence saying that, okay, this chapter is a general logical chapter. Through your logic also, you can answer these questions. Correct. So you have answered this so very nicely. Complete stock and consignment records even without GST registration. Correct. Even without registration, complete stock and consignment records have to be maintained. As if the goods were supplied by XYZ textile with provisions of section 73 and 74 applied. Okay, what is 73 and 74? That we do self-assessment, right? Then the officer does the assessment and arrives at the demand. That power is given in this section 73 and 74. Good. Correct. Option is B, records of transported goods delivered and GST of the consignor and consignee. as a hard copy in an electronically readable format with password and access details. So either a hard copy or in electronically readable format with password and access details provided. Yes, 6B, ensure such entry is serially numbered. Yeah, this one is a enrollment. That is, a warehouser who is not registered needs a unique enrollment number. So to get that enrollment number, they have to file ENR1. Okay, so that is the form for getting the enrollment number. Application will be in ENR1. Correct. Normal, if a service provider or any GST registered person who's maintaining the records in soft manner, that is in digital records, then they should ensure the records are regularly backed up and can be restored if lost. So that's not only a general practice, even a GST practice that when they need it, you cannot tell my data got lost. The rule says that you have to take a backup regularly and restore it when lost. So you have to follow this. Till now, I'm seeing that everyone is giving correct answer. There has been like meager wrong answers. So it means that this chapter, without reading, without explaining, also you're able to understand and give the correct answers. Correct. The answer is B. Names and address of the clients, description of material use, and payment details for each contract. This is required for a works contractor. Correct. Then the answer is B. Quantitative details of raw materials, finished goods, waste, and byproducts. As a manufacturer, he has to maintain this. Yeah. At the each additional piece of business listed on their registration, they have to maintain records. Okay. So multiple location if there, that location also records are to be maintained. Only a password protected file, no. Authentication will not happen through password protected file. Authentication can happen either by physical signature or through a digital signature. And when it is maintained electronically, physical signature will not be possible, right? So then the purpose itself will be defeated if you have to print everything and sign it. So they're allowed that you can authenticate the document through a digital signature. Yeah. Question number 13, no answers. Yeah, it's there. Correct. 13B, obtain GST registration if turnover is below threshold. This is not her responsibility. Correct. Question is which is not her responsibility because other three are her responsibility. She has to maintain consignment records. She has to do maintain records of goods stored, provide records, but obtain registration is not her responsibility. Very confusing question, this one, and very varied answer. But the answer is that all dealers must record goods disposed as samples. Okay. He should have a record of the samples because all dealers, irrespective in the general category under Section 35, they mentioned that any goods which is disposed as samples has to be recorded. So even though he's a composition dealer, he will have to have records of the goods disposed as samples as well. Is the screen visible now? Correct. Full particulars, including dispatch, movement, receipt, and disposal history is to be given. She is not required to keep. So she is not required to keep records of consignment charges incurred. She has to keep record of the tax paid on receipts, description of the goods supplied, accounts furnished to each principal, but record of consignment charges incurred is not required. So the answer is C. Stock of records no need to maintain by composition dealer. No, it is required to maintain. No, question number 14, Gayatri. If you see, all dealers, including a composition dealer, has to maintain the comp this the details of the samples also. So answer is Yes, all dealers. Yep. Answer is Ray. Correct. Retrieve a backup within a reasonable time. Very good. Good, good, good. Yes. 18D. Total expenditure on raw materials. Why not B? Because tax total expenditure on raw materials he is required. He is receiving materials from various suppliers for his projects. Okay. Quantity and value of all the goods received and utilized in each project. Project-wise breakup is not required. Okay. The GST is a composite thing where they don't need project-wise. They'll need expenditure on the raw materials because there he will claim the credit. That's where D is the requirement. B is not a requirement. Each project-wise breakup not required from the GST perspective at least. Yeah, Gayatri, you're saying 11.9, it doesn't cover. Actually, 11.9 covers it, right? It says stock of goods, accounts of stock in respect of goods received and supplied, and such accounts shall contain particulars of opening balance, receipt, supply, goods, lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, or disposed of by way of gift or free sample. So that is the stock of goods which is required to maintain by everyone. However, a supplier who has opted for composition is not required to maintain such records. That is, following records, but a supplier who has opted for composition is not required to maintain such records. Okay, so that's clear. Yeah, you're right. So you stand corrected. So if they don't, so there they are not required to maintain stock of things. So we'll go and correct that answer. A composition dealer, no, he must need not keep track of records. Yes, because composition dealers are exempt from stock records. Correct? That's the correct answer then. Is not opted. So they are not required to maintain such records. So the correct answer is 14. You're right. Thank you, Gayatri, for bringing that up. Then question number 19. Yeah, if they don't record, so during the but GST law doesn't say that for as a composition leather you have to maintain it. So they're giving you an exemption there, but if you have a plan to do that, to convert from composition to leather, then you will have to keep it. But otherwise, the provision says you don't have to maintain. Yeah, 19. Answer is B. Actually, it is D, right? Because only with tax invoice attached, no. Actually, the answer is D, not B. I think that's a mistake here. Separately so that they can be identified item wise and owner wise. Last question for the day. Already 8:45. Good answer is C. All manually kept records must be serially numbered. Good. Thank you for your active participation in this. That with MCQ we understood so many things, and thanks for correcting Gayatri. If there's any such things, I am ready to accept it. But yes, the objective is to give you a correct answer. I just missed out that one line. And if there is any kind of questions which you have on these chapters, we can take it up. Thank you so much. Have a good day. We'll have a class again tomorrow. So this was my new method to teach you in terms of MCQs where the topic is very dry so that we could participate and learn and understand also. Hope that was helpful. Thank you. Good night. Yes, yes.